In Football Manager, there's only one better feeling than finding a great young wonder kid and signing them for your team, and that is when that wonder kid comes from your academy. So today, I'm going to show you everything you need to know to make your youth academy world class. Now, we've got a lot to get through in this video, so I'll try and make it as easy to follow as I can. There's going to be stuff in here that will be basic stuff for new players to learn, but also some hidden little tips that you can do to really improve your young players' development that even experienced players might not know about. Before we get into it though, make sure you smash the like button for us and subscribe. Now, I'm not just asking you guys to do those things for the sake of it being a YouTube video, but it really does help support the channel, especially during this time where we're kind of in between Football Manager games and there's less eyes on the content. The more support we can get, the better. So thank you to anybody who does that. But let's get into the video. How can you make the best world-class academy? We want to have the best young prospects coming through, but there's two steps to that. Firstly, we're talking about the players that generate in your youth intake, but in this video, one of the big focuses will be what you do from there to develop these young players to be actual usable stars for your team and not just kids with high potential. But let's start off with the first part. How do you get the good youth intakes? We'll cover it very basically because there's whole videos about this, but the most basic thing is your facilities. That's your youth facilities, your academy coaching, and your youth recruitment. All of those things will affect the quality of the young players that come out in your youth intakes. Your academy coaching, youth facilities will affect the actual ability of those young players that come through. And the youth recruitment determines how big your net is that you're casting to swoop these wonder kids up. If you had low youth recruitment, you'd only get players from the area of your team, but if you have wide youth recruitment, like we have here, 20 out of 20, that is the best number you can get, you're likely going to be picking up wonder kids from all over Germany without you having to do anything, potentially even across the world, coming through in your youth intake. So that's the first thing, the basic thing. Make sure you've got good facilities. As a side note, just in case you don't know how to improve these things, go to Club Vision and then make board requests. In finance and networking, should you have the ability to improve any of those facilities or recruitment or coaching, you'll get the option in here. You can ask the board for it, and fingers crossed they give you that access to better facilities. Now though, let's talk about thing number two. That's your head of youth development. Again, this will affect the quality of your youth intakes. It's in the staff section. Go to the coaching screen and you will find your head of youth development. They are ranked on 3 attributes in game: working with youngsters, judging player ability, and judging player potential. Once more, you can't guarantee a golden generation youth intake every time, but by having these good attributes in these areas, Lars Ricken in particular is amazing at all 3, you're going to give yourself the best chance of a good youth intake. Something else to make note of is their preferred formation. Your head of youth development will likely pick up players that suit their preferred formation, in this case a 4-2-3-1 DM wide. So I wouldn't expect Lars Ricken to bring through, say, a right midfielder or a left midfielder. The players are likely going to suit the formation that he has, and his personality will also take influence on the young players that come through. He'll likely pick players for his youth intake that have a similar personality to him. So the better your personality of the head of youth development, the better. Here he's a model professional. That's exactly what we're looking for. So if you take into account the things we just covered, you'll have some pretty good youth intakes coming in. There's a few other things that can affect your youth intake. We've done whole videos about that in the past that you can search up should you want to watch them. But what we're focusing on today is creating that world-class academy system. We've obviously spoke about so far how you get good youth intakes, but now how do you develop these players in your youth teams to be ready for your first team, and what are some extra tips you can do to improve those chances? Let's get into that. First of all, you have staff for your youth teams. If you don't know, you go to Dev Center and then you go to staff, and there's a staff for your under 18s, under 19s, under 21s, your reserve team, whatever it is your club is set up with. In Dortmund's case, we have under 19s and a Borussia Dortmund 2 side. Let's focus on the under 19s, but of course, if you were doing this in a real save, you'd want to make sure your second team staff was good and your under 19 staff is good. But where your young players will do the majority of their development is in the youngest possible tier, whether that's under 18s or under 19s, so make sure you've got good staff in those areas. As you can see, you'll get a comparison here to learn just how good your staff is compared to everyone else. It looks like we could use a better goalkeeping coach in our youth teams, but in general, if you're after someone for your youth academy as a coach, let's say this guy here, Peter Wazinski is a pretty good coach. He's got some nice attributes in areas, and you're never going to find the perfect coach that has 20 everything and 20 for working with youngsters, but you want to make sure in general you've got a good coaching setup. You can send these people on courses should you need to. If you have someone that maybe doesn't have this Continental Pro license, I'll try and find one. Here you go, this guy here, under 19s fitness coach, could actually be sent on a course that will increase his coaching attributes over time, so it's definitely a good idea to do that. But in general, just try and make sure you've got the best staff possible in your youth team. That will help the development of your youngsters. The better their coaching, the better the training sessions, the more they're going to develop. It all goes hand in hand And so getting a strong staff as the backbone to your youth side is vital for good youth development. So by implementing all this structure around your young players, you're giving them the best chance to develop. But one thing that Football Manager players often overlook, or maybe don't know how to do, is how to judge these young players. It's easy to look at your youth teams and go, this guy's got the highest star rating potential, he must be the best. But there's a few things I want you to know, because a lot can be misleading. Firstly, the thing you've probably heard me mention multiple times on the channel, these star ratings might not be accurate. It's a good indication that this player has more potential than the others, but it could be false information because the info is provided by a staff member. If that staff member has poor attributes, he might be giving you the wrong idea. In general though, if you've got good staff, you can kind of take note of this, but it doesn't mean that this goalie will necessarily do better than any of these players with supposedly less potential, because it might be for a few reasons that the guys with less potential are actually better players in game, and let me break down why that might be. Firstly, these young players could have all the potential in the world, but if they don't have the right personality or determination, they might struggle a little bit. It doesn't mean the player will be a waste, but it just might mean they'll find it hard to reach their potential, so bear that in mind. Also, bear in mind that these star ratings are given to you based on a number that's given to a player in terms of their ability and their current ability that's determined by an average of the attributes they have. But what that doesn't necessarily take into account is the fact that while this guy might be our best young defensive midfield prospect supposedly, that's because he's got a really good attribute in tackling and he's really brave, whatever it might be, and that's raising his current ability. But actually, if you look at him, is this guy really going to go far as a defensive midfielder? 10 positioning, 4 vision, 9 passing. He might do, I might be being harsh, but you've just got to bear in mind these star ratings don't mean everything. Take a look at the attributes and you'll probably be able to tell quite quickly which player has potential to do well in the future. Now, the reason I mention all this is because it's very easy for a lot of players to just take a look at their best youth intake or their top 3 players in their youth team and focus on their development. And I'm not saying that's wrong. It probably is best to kind of focus your time and energy, if you have limited amounts, on the best players than it is making sure that, you know, this guy gets really good training, when in reality, he probably doesn't have the brightest future ever, right? So that's just something to bear in mind when you are looking at these players. Make sure you're not giving the attention to the wrong ones. Analyse the youngsters, don't just take the star ratings into account, actually look at their attributes and look at what they might offer for your team. And that brings us on nicely to an example of a good wonder kid that you might want to develop, like Stephen Afrai here. And if you have a look, he's already got great attributes for the position he's playing, and I'm sure he's going to go on to do great in the future. The one thing that I want to point out that I think you guys should all look for in young players is versatility. Now, this is usually given to you either in the coach report, or if you have a look here, the fact that he has, you know, got already 4 positions to his game despite only being 18 tells you he's likely a pretty versatile player, and the younger a player is, the better you're going to be able to mould them to a new position. So if you did not think that Afrai here was a right back, probably even might be a little bit too late for it now. You still could do, but the younger that you identify this, the better the chance you have of developing them for a different position. Now, I do think that Afrai is best in this right back spot, but let's say his attributes actually suited centre back. Well, you could go to development, and very early on in his career, you could go ahead and make sure he was focusing in on a defender role to try and improve that, and over time, he's going to learn this. Young players are like a sponge in Football Manager. They'll absorb more information than the older player will, whether that's a new position, whether that's an individual training, focusing in, say, on that marking. You could get that a lot higher than if you tried to focus on marking for an older player, for example. You'll see much better improvements in these youngsters, particularly during the ages of 16 to 18. So what I want you to be doing is every time you have a youth intake, take a look at the players, analyse them. If they look like they suit the position they're in, great. But if you think, you know what, I actually think this guy would make a really good left back or something, you can go and do that. Make sure they're training early on in the position that they'll eventually play. And remember, the more positions that you can see already that the player knows, the more likely they are that they're a versatile player that might be able to switch position pretty comfortably. Now, speaking of training these young players to a new position, we should focus a little bit more on that individual training that I mentioned a second ago. This is something that I also want you to do as soon as you get your young players come through in the youth intake. If you do it down the line, it's fine, but the earlier you get these players learning something, the more they're going to absorb and the better they're going to develop. So for example, we've got Simsek here. When he came through at 16 in our academy, what I should have done, obviously, like I say, I wasn't hands-on managing in this save. What I would have done is I would have analysed him and said, you know what, yeah, central midfielder does seem like a fine position for him, but maybe there's a glaring weakness in his game, like his, say, positioning. But I can also see he's a really good passer of the football with great technique. So you now have 2 choices to direct his training. Either you can focus in on making sure that he's really good at the things that he's really good at, or you can try and iron out the weaknesses, which is what I like to do in these younger players, because they will develop over time, they will get better, but sometimes if a certain certain weakness gets left too far behind, by the time he's 19, 20, it's going to be very hard to really upgrade the attribute, so it's better to focus on that early on, I would say. So I'd be making sure that, one, he's focusing in on a specific role. Don't just have him train in a certain position, make sure he is training a certain role. So let's say it was Mazzala on the attack we wanted him to do. You can then go ahead and make sure that his individual focus is on that positioning. There we go, I've selected defensive positioning. That will improve his marking and his positioning, and it's never going to be at a world-class level now. The earlier you can focus on that, the better these young players are going to develop. And speaking of development, one thing you should be aware of is that a lot of young players will develop their physical attributes between 16 and 18, then usually their technicals will come along, and then later in their career, their mentals will come along. So if you see a young player that maybe isn't the best physically, don't worry too much, that's going to change over time. As you would expect with any youngster in real life, between the ages of 16 and 18, their body's going to change massively, and they'll completely grow into a different beast altogether, whereas they might not really be the best leader until they're later on in their career. So bear all of that in mind. Don't expect great development straight away in their mental attributes. It's going to take time. Young players won't be stars immediately, but if you focus in on all of these things early on in their career, identifying the right position, ironing out their weaknesses, you're going to be creating a good set of young players that are coming through, making this academy really strong for the future. Okay, so far so good. Hopefully you're all following. If you have any questions, let me know down below. But I'm now going to move on to some of the more advanced tips, you might want to call them, in Football Manager that even some of the more experienced players might know. Now, I've already spoken about individual player development there when we looked at their additional focuses, but if you go to the staff screen and you go down to training in their responsibilities section, what you can do is you can take control of training for a youth team, so you can set up all of their training plans and whatnot. Now, I'm no expert on what training plan is the best, so I'm not going to go into that on today's video. There's plenty of different videos out there that will tell you the best training plan for youngsters, but I definitely suggest that you at least tick this one here of Leeds individual training. That way you can make sure the players are getting the right additional focus, and you could maybe leave the development up to the manager in terms of the actual training regime should you want to. I imagine realistically you would get better development if you set up a, masterful training plan yourself and took control of every single training session, but I know majority of you won't want to do that, but make sure you are at least doing the leading individual training. But just below that is a button that is vitally important that I believe isn't normally ticked in Football Manager. At least for me, it never is. Receive training emails for your youth team. Make sure that's ticked. What this will do is you'll get an email regularly into your inbox, like you do for your first team more than likely if you've ticked that box, where you get an email saying, Mokoko's been really good in training, but Marco Reus hasn't. Hummels has been great in training, but, I don't know, who's another player for Borussia Dortmund? My head's gone blank. Adeyemi maybe hasn't trained very well. And with that, you can then action this. You can criticise the player's training or praise the player's training, and this has a way bigger effect than you might think. In fact, if you start praising the right players and criticising the right players, before you know it, your training will be happening at a masterful level, and all of your players will really be training well, which is going to help their development. And that applies for youth players too, and it's arguably more important. If you can make sure these players are being praised and criticised at the right moments, you'll increase their development and make sure they have the better chance of becoming a top pro. So make sure you are criticising and praising top level performers and poor level performers in training as regularly as you can every time that email comes through, or you can even do it manually should you want to by going to the under-19s, maybe picking someone like, I don't know, Jacek Frederick here. You can then go to discuss, warn player, and then criticise training. I think the season is over here, so he's probably finished his training, but again, you get the idea. Make sure you're going ahead and criticising and praising when you can to make sure that these players are training to the highest level possible to aid their development. We're getting towards the end now, but there's another thing that I want you guys to consider, and that's when you go to the development centre. A lot of people ignore it, but there's plenty of information on here that you need to be taking note of. Firstly, these first team candidates. If you have players in this box, they are guys that are probably ready for first team football, if not with you, then with someone else. Now, these guys are 19 years of age. Just so you know, to lay it out clear, if you've got a player between the ages of 16 and 18, don't worry too much about game time. If they're good enough for your first team, feel free to use them, but if they're not, let them develop. They'll actually do better training in the youth teams and getting the development there. But once they're over 18, once they're 19 years of age, they need football. Whether it's with you or whether it's being loaned out or sold on, now is the time to do it. We've got a youngster here who looks really promising actually, and if he's not ready for the first team yet, I need to get him some football. And these players are all guys you need to action. Now, some obviously are going to stay at your club in your Borussia Dortmund 2 team or the equivalent that your side might have, but for really promising ones that you want to make sure develop, make sure you're getting them out there. They're clearly too good for this level of football, so make sure they are developing. The game brings it to your attention on purpose, so you know that you should action these players. But one thing a lot of people ignore are these bits at the bottom here, needs attention. Take a look at this because it will tell you, based on someone's development, development, whether they need some kind of action put in. We can see we've got 5 players here that supposedly need attention, and we can look as to why. Maybe it just might be that a young player's got a lot of promise, like Mbom, and we might go, you know what, I really need to focus on this guy's development and make sure he's going down the right path. Or it might be that someone like this 23-year-old is kind of stunted and we need to decide if we're moving him on. I have no idea why he's still here at the club, but he is. During the transfer window as well, if you go to this loan section, you'll get an idea of young players that maybe need a loan but aren't ready for first team football in this loan suggestions box, so have a look there as well. Now, I mentioned loans a second ago, and one thing that you can do to make sure you get the best loans for your players, and there isn't, you know, the chance taken that they might go to a poor club with poor facilities, is to get an affiliate club. You can go to Club Vision, make board requests, go down to, I think it's networking, and then there'll be an affiliate club section where you'll have the option to ask for a club, and you want to find one that will allow you to send players out on loan. And you can see they've agreed with it here, and you can even sometimes, if a board like you enough, get involved yourself and pick the club yourself. Now, the good thing about the affiliate clubs is you can choose the one with the best youth facilities, the best academy coaching, or ones where you know they're going to get first team football. Particularly if they're in your country, it's even better, because then you don't have to worry about adaptability, which is a hidden attribute that every young player has in game. Take this guy here, for example. If we were to go into the in-game editor, we'd be able to find out if he's adaptable or if he's not adaptable. The less adaptable a player is, the longer it's going to take for him to adapt to a new country. So you can kind of take that fear away if you are loaning players out to clubs in your nation. That way you know they're always going to adapt to that nation. So if you've done everything correctly, you'll have good facilities and a good head of youth development. That will make your youth intakes better. Then with those players, you'll be identifying them early on, training them into the right positions, ironing out their weaknesses and focusing in on their additional trainings. Then once they hit 18 years of age, 19, it's time to get them some football, whether it's loaning it out to an affiliate club or bringing them into your first team. And that is the ideal part. You want to get to the point where these players are ready to come into your first team squad. You've monitored them the whole way, you promote them into your first team, and then you need to make sure their development does not stunt. Make sure these young players are being mentored in the mentoring section to ensure their development. If you want to know more about mentoring, I've done a whole video on that already. But if you follow all of these steps, you'll create a world-class academy where you'll have players like all of these guys ready to try and break into the first team or make you a profit in the transfer market. There's no better feeling than developing a homegrown talent and watching them become a legend at your club. Hopefully that all made sense. Any questions, let me know down below. I know it was a long one, I know it was quite a talky video, but hopefully it made sense. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.